This is a presentation of Dark They Were and Golden Eyed by Palmer, Anna, David, and Gabby. I had the biographical lens. The author of this story was Ray Bradbury. Here's a picture of him and a quote that I thought kind of accurately described how excited he felt for writing. He said, "The great fun in my life has been getting up every morning and rushing to the typewriter because some new idea has hit me. The feeling I have every day is very much the same as it was when I was 12. In any event, here I am, 80 years old, feeling different, full of a great sense of joy and glad for the long life that has been allowed me. I have good plans for the next 10 or 20 years, and I hope you'll come along." I think this shows that he really loved writing, and he felt excited for it every day. Here are some facts about Ray Bradbury. He was a man of many talents. He was a novelist, a short story writer, a playwright, a screenwriter, and a poet. He was born August 22nd, 1920 in Illinois. He loved horror films and science fiction magazines when he was growing up, which is why he wrote so many science fiction short stories later on in his life. His family moved to Los Angeles in 1934, and he graduated from high school in Los Angeles in 1938. He never went to college because he preferred to let life inspire him instead. He joined the Los Angeles Science Fiction League in 1937, where he was inspired by other young writers. This is part of the reason why, again, he wrote so much science fiction. He was part of this science fiction league where he had a lot of inspiration from the other science fiction writers. He became a full-time writer in 1943. He also got married to his wife Maggie in 1947 and stayed with her until her death in 2003. They had 4 daughters together. He published his first short story in 1938, Holler-Boken's Dilemma. His first book of short stories, Dark Carnival, was published in 1947, and he started to gain attention quickly, with his stories starting to appear more and more in famous magazines. Fahrenheit 451, which is often considered his greatest work, was published in 1951. It's not a science fiction story, but it's about a fireman who lives in a future society where books are prohibited. His job, being the fireman, is to burn the books, but instead he takes one and starts reading. In 1951, he also published a series of short stories, The Illustrated Man, with many being set in the future in science fiction like Dark They Were and Golden Eyed. These have similarities to this piece, such as The Long Rain, with a group of explorers that are stuck on Venus with constant rain, and The Other Foot, where Mars has been colonized by African Americans. Both those short stories were part of The Illustrated Man. He worked on the screenplay for the Moby Dick film and in Hollywood on the Playhouse 90, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and the Twilight Zone scripts. He published more plays and mystery short stories later in his life. He was definitely a jack of all trades in the literary field. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Icarus Montgolfier Wright and won an Emmy Award for an adaptation of The Halloween Tree. His greatest influences were Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and L. Frank Baum. These are fantasy fiction writers. Edgar Allan Poe for horror, and real-world events like the Great Depression and World War II also inspired Ray Bradbury. Here's a book that Ray Bradbury wrote named The Martian Chronicles. It's on a very similar topic to the one of Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed. Mars and people on Mars. The Martian Chronicles tells about how people from Earth conquer Mars but end up being conquered by Mars. This is very similar to what happens in the short story as well. Because when the Earth settlers come to Mars, they give their own names to all the Mars hills and valleys, plant flowers from Earth, build houses pretty much like they're back on Earth, and grocery stores. They bring Earth to Mars. But Mars ends up actually changing them, changing their looks, changing their culture because they adopt the Martian language and the Martian names for everything. Eventually, they reject the things that they brought from Earth. And when the citizens from Earth visit them again after the atomic war has ended, they actually can't tell the difference between the Martians and the humans. They're so similar. These are my biographical questions. How did Ray Bradbury's greatest influences contribute to this particular work? And what are some possible connections between this short story and some of Ray Bradbury's other works? So, Ray Bradbury's greatest influences were Edgar Allan Poe for horror, which this kind of could be construed somewhat as a horror because they are changing so much from people into Martian aliens. And then also he had a lot of fantasy fiction writers that were his greatest influences, like Jules Verne. And also, this work was particularly heavily influenced by the real world life events of World War II. What are some possible connections between this short story and some of Ray Bradbury's other works? Well, The Martian Chronicles was very similar to this work because it was also about Mars and people settling on Mars. And then, like I said before, The Illustrated Man had several short stories in it that were very similar to this as well, like The Long Rain, because the colonists are stuck on Venus, while these colonists are stuck on Mars since they can't get back because of the atomic war happening on Earth. And then The Other Foot, where Mars is colonized by African Americans. In this short story, Mars is colonized by people.